In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Standing by the light of the Easter candle that we lit at dawn this morning, I have to ask, what difference does the resurrection of Jesus Christ make to you and me? That's the question we've been thinking about at St. Mary's throughout Lent. I suppose we have to ask ourselves, first of all, do we really believe in the resurrection? That's the question Emily posed to us on Maundy Thursday. Are we convinced that something happened on this day 2,000 years ago that changed the whole cosmos? Or is it easier to keep it all in the past, seeing Easter as the story of a good man who was put to death and was then in some form or other an inspiration to his friends? I have to tell you plainly, if that is all that Easter means, I'm ready to take off my collar and find another job. We have plenty of heroes already. We have plenty of moral examples. And the world is full of people who try to be kind and honest and help their neighbor. We don't need the resurrection in order to share those values. Emily suggested on Thursday evening that it's awfully tempting to stay at the table with Jesus, enjoying his fellowship, and not face the challenge of following him to a place where we are no longer in control, a place she described as where the unknown completely overshadows the known. We all, of course, like the example of loving service. We can aspire to that. We like Jesus washing his disciples' feet. We sometimes say that the NHS is Britain's real national religion, and the past year has shown us that we can easily idolize those who serve, but without necessarily wanting to run those risks ourselves. The door that leads out of that upper room into the darkness of Gethsemane and the horrors of Golgotha is one that we would really rather not go through. We're quite comfortable in our personal lockdown where we don't have to witness or share the agony of others. On Good Friday, Mark challenged us to recognize how we all tend to hunker down in our comfort zone within our own story, and how we tend to scapegoat and categorize each other and build walls that divide us so that we can judge each other. It was those very human instincts that led to Jesus' death. Two institutional enemies that felt under threat from Jesus, the conservative temple authorities and the jumpy Roman occupiers, joined forces to eradicate one man for the sake of keeping the peace. Can we be honest enough to see ourselves, like the disciples, slipping away from Jesus' company and lining up with the powerful establishments so that we could at least keep ourselves out of trouble? I can imagine that for myself only too easily. But the story doesn't stop on Good Friday either, with all of us hanging our heads and feeling queasy about keeping a low profile while a good man dies for us. As both Emily and Mark reminded us, the narrative drives onwards to Easter. It's what happened today that makes sense of everything. Jesus' life of loving service didn't end with washing his disciples' feet. It took him to a cruel and humiliating death that he willingly accepted. His execution didn't mean the end of yet another noble lost cause, providing nothing more than an excuse for us to be cynical about any attempt to change the world. No, the story didn't stop on Maundy Thursday, and it didn't stop on Good Friday. Easter morning was an absolute explosion, a genuine new creation, an astonishing act of God that changes everything. It marks the turning point in the history of the world. By the light of Easter, we see everything that happened before in a different way. and by that same light, we walk into a completely different future. Because what happened on Easter morning was that we discovered what God is like. The man from Nazareth who taught, healed, challenged, and served everyone, the charismatic rabbi who welcomed and included the marginalized, who spoke of the nearness of God's rule and the offer of forgiveness, didn't stay dead. His resurrection showed his demoralized disciples that the story was only just beginning. Jesus was raised by God to be the Lord of life. His way of living is shown to be God's way. And so everything that was true of Jesus in his earthly life and ministry turns out to be reliably true about God. If the grave couldn't hold Jesus, then God is love and welcome and forgiveness and hope. God is for us. Our lives are not a meaningless cosmic joke. We are held in a loving gaze that continues to challenge, welcome, and forgive us. We don't just remember a wonderful teacher who is long dead. We are brought face to face with a living Lord who sees us as we really are and who loves us to the end. For our online Lent course this year, Mark interviewed Sarah Bachelard, whose book on resurrection and moral imagination has inspired our thinking this year. She said in that interview, "If the gaze that sees you as you are is also loving and on your side, then that's liberating and transformative." And that's exactly what happened in one resurrection encounter after another. Take today's story, which is my favorite Easter story of all. Mary Magdalene is knocked sideways by grief. She looks among the dead for her beloved teacher. She's brought ointment to perfume his body. She is ready to mourn her loss, to treat his corpse with respect, and to accept the end of all her hopes. She's no optimist, no fantasist. She is prepared to face the bitterness of the death of Jesus. She had been ready to leave the comfort of the dinner table. She followed Jesus to his horrible death on the cross. But now she knows that it's all over. Life is, after all, a tragedy. It is at her bleakest moment, when she hopes for nothing and is blinded by her loss and by her tears, that she hears her name spoken. The strange man whom she took to be a worker in the graveyard is suddenly revealed to her as Jesus risen from the dead. It is because she is seen and known that she is able to see and recognize him. It's because he calls her by her name that she is able to know who he is. If the gaze that sees you as you are is also loving and on your side, then that's liberating and transformative. And Mary Magdalene is changed by it. Her first instinct is to throw her arms around Jesus, but he gives her a commission. She is to be the apostle of the resurrection. She was the myrrh bearer, bringing perfume to the tomb, but now she is to be the news bearer, taking good news from the tomb. She is to tell the fearful and grieving disciples that love wins. The other resurrection stories that we'll be reading during this Eastertide season have a similar trajectory. Jesus looks lovingly at doubting Thomas and shows him his wounds, and Thomas responds by saying, "My Lord and my God." Jesus looks lovingly at Peter, full of the misery of his betrayal, and gently gives him the opportunity to erase his triple denial with a triple declaration of love. As Mark reminded us on Good Friday, there isn't a hint of blame or condemnation in any of these encounters. Each one is a restoration of a personal relationship. I wonder what kind of encounter Judas would have had with the risen Christ if he had not rashly hanged himself in a moment of remorse and despair. Can we imagine anything other than a loving look from the Lord to his betrayer? Can we picture that transformative meeting taking place beyond the end of Judas' earthly life? I hope so. Jesus returns to his friends without resentment, without judgment, but with forgiveness and welcome. Peace be with you, he says repeatedly. Don't be afraid. On Good Friday, Mark quoted the poet Rumi, "Beyond right and wrong, there is a field. I'll meet you there." That is the field where the risen Christ calls us to meet him. It's the post-resurrection world, the new creation God made in the darkness before dawn on Easter Day. The resurrection reveals that life isn't a zero-sum game. You win, I lose, and vice versa. The new creation is a field beyond the blame game, beyond scapegoating, where everyone's story is heard and everyone's name is known. If we enter into this resurrection life through a relationship with the risen Christ, we discover ourselves to be known and loved. And because we are loved, we are liberated and transformed. Imagine a world where you are known completely. Everything you've ever thought or said or done is revealed, and yet you are not condemned. You see yourself reflected clearly in the loving gaze of God. You are called by your name. What needs to be healed is forgiven, and what needs to grow begins to flourish. You are invited into a whole new world of possibilities. I say, imagine it, but we are in it. In church this morning, we have stepped into that field where the loving gaze falls on each of us like the sunshine, and the bread of life is about to be placed in our hands. Will you say yes today to the risen Lord?